Okay, agencies are entering at the moment. You're live.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Public Safety and Administration Subcommittee budget hearing. I am Delegate Tony Bridges, the chair of the Public Safety and Administration Subcommittee, along with Vice Chair Proctor and Delegate McKay. We have three agencies that we're going to hear from today: Judiciary, the Comptroller of Maryland, and the Alcohol and Tobacco Commission. We're going to start with the budget analysts and then have questions from the committee. After the analysts, we'll go to the agencies. And for any of the directors or leads of the agencies, if you can start by introducing the members of your team and getting into your testimony, as well as commenting on the recommendations from the analysts, and then we'll ask questions afterwards. And so what we're going to do is start with Judiciary, and we have Mr. Caleb Weiss, who's going to give us the analysis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here to start the presentation. Can everyone see the analysis document?
Yes.
The judiciary budget for fiscal 2023 increases by $29.4 million or 4.4% to bring the total to $0.5 million. A couple key observations before we start with the MFR section. The 2021 Judicial Compensation Commission recommendations are included in this fiscal year budget. This includes a placeholder adjustment in the judiciary's budget that was submitted prior to the recommendations of the commission. The commission did recommend a $10,000 salary increase for judges in each fiscal year, beginning in fiscal 2023 and continuing for the next 4 fiscal years. The Access to Counsel and Evictions program also begins its rollout in 2023, and there'll be additional discussion of that in the issues section. The Racial Equity Impact Notes program, also there's some data availability concerns regarding that program and the non-standardization of data within the courts that makes it difficult to track demographic information on defendants. That will also be discussed in the issue section as well. And the final issue for the issue section is the fiscal 2021 court performance measures report, which was not submitted due to the suspension of case processing standard times during the COVID-19 pandemic. Moving ahead to Exhibit 1 and the Managing for Results section. As you can see here, due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, the number of cases filed in both the district courts and the circuit courts decreased again in fiscal 2021 over the prior year. This is the second year of declines that substantial declines that we're seeing due to COVID-19. Exhibit 2 is the case types by within the district court. As you can see here, all case types, with the exception of domestic violence cases, decreased in 2021 over the prior year. Domestic violence cases, however, did rise slightly in fiscal 2021 compared to fiscal 2020. Exhibit 3 is the case types by percentages within the district court. As you can see here, 33% of cases are traffic cases here in the yellow pie slice. Landlord-tenant cases here in the red pie slice are 31%, which is the second largest portion. That's particularly important this year as we discuss the Access to Counsel and Evictions program later in the budget analysis. Moving ahead to the circuit court in Exhibit 4, as you can see here, all 3 types of cases in the circuit courts decreased in fiscal 2021 over the prior year: criminal, civil, and juvenile cases. Exhibit 5 shows the appointed attorney program by county. It also shows the number of people who waived the access to an attorney as well. Baltimore City, similar to prior years, comprises the largest percent at 42%, followed by Prince George's County at 21%. Exhibit 6 shows the pretrial dispositions for unsecured release, assigned bail, and held without bail. As you can see in fiscal 2021, the number of individuals held without bail increased, while the number assigned bail decreased as part of a long-running trend. The number of unsecured releases has decreased as well from 2020 and 2019 as well. Exhibit 7 shows the utilization of Judiciary's self-help programs, the District Court one, the Family Law one, and the Maryland Courts Help Center. I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that the Maryland Courts Help Center has been able to operate remotely during COVID-19. And as you can see, that number in fiscal 2021 has increased fairly dramatically, while the other two help centers have decreased due to the in-person nature of their operations. And you can see that those numbers have fallen off starting in 2020 and continuing through 2021 as well. Next is Exhibit 8 and a new section in the Measuring for Results section of the analysis. This covers the problem-solving courts. As you can see here, we have the Veterans Court, the Mental Health Court, and the Drug Courts. And this shows the number of individuals in fiscal 2021 who entered that type of court program, graduated, were discharged for administrative reasons, and were terminated from the program. As you can see, the Drug Court participants in the navy blue bar comprise the largest in both the entered, graduated, and terminated, while for administrative discharges, the mental health courts comprise the largest portion. This shows the overall total participants and expenditures for the problem-solving courts. As you can see, the number of participants increased slightly in 2021, while the expenditures dipped slightly. We're now going to move into the fiscal 2023 budget with an overview of agency spending in Exhibit 10. As you can see here, 72% of spending goes towards personnel, which is similar to prior years, while 9% is grants. Exhibit 11 shows the spending by program. 68% of spending goes towards the trial courts, where 16% goes to administration and support, 12% towards information technology, and 4% for appellate courts. Exhibit 12 is the proposed budget increases. I'd like to draw your attention here to the Judicial Compensation Commission placeholder adjustment here on the top line, which has $18.4 million increase. The next one, there's also a 3.5% merit increase in the judiciary budget for our judiciary employees at $8.3 million, as well as 34.75 new positions, which include $2.5 million in the budget. I'd also like to draw your attention to the Circuit Court clerk salary increases, which is pending Senate Bill 74 or House Bill 519 of the current legislative session. That includes $1.3 million to fund those increases. There's also an increase of in non-personnel of $1.5 million for family and jurisdictional grants, and $1.2 million for digital information systems licenses for softwares used. On the next page, I'd like to draw your attention to the one-time fiscal 2022 pretrial home detention spending, which shows up as a negative decrease of $5 million in the fiscal 2023 budget. Moving ahead to Exhibit 13, we have the new personnel spending by type. Here in the red, we have the Judicial Compensation Commission enhancements, those placeholders that I talked about, at 58% of the new personnel spending. 26% of the new personnel spending is for the 3.5% merit increase, and 8% is for those 34.75 new regular positions. We also have 4% for the clerks of the court increases, and then only 4% of the new personnel spending is due to other personnel increases. The 2021 Judicial Compensation Commission recommendations included a $10,000 increase for judges in the fiscal 2023 budget. On the next page here, DLS recommends deleting the excess general funds that are not needed to fund the recommendations of council above the amount that was placed in the budget as a placeholder. That would equal $12.5 million in excess general funds. Next, we have this clerks of this circuit court salary increases. The judiciary included $1.3 million in personnel spending as a result of the possible passage of Senate Bill 74, House Bill 519 of the current legislative session. DLS recommends adopting budget bill language, reducing the judiciary's budget by $619,000 to delete the excess funds above the amount recommended in the fiscal note. DLS also recommends restricting the remaining $719,000 pending the passage of those bills. There's a little bit of information here about statewide salary actions as well that are going to be allocated to the judiciary. Moving on to the personnel data. As you can see here, the judiciary budget includes 34.75 new regular positions and 7 new contractual positions. Exhibit 14 shows the new positions by judiciary subdivision. As you can see, the district courts are receiving the largest number of these new positions at 29.5 new positions, with the circuit courts over here at 5, and the administrative office of the courts at 4.35. The first issue in the analysis is the access to counsel and evictions funding. Chapter 746 of 2021 established a right to counsel in cases of eviction for qualifying individuals. It also established the Access to Counsel and Evictions Task Force, which is led by the Office of the Attorney General. The task force was responsible for studying potential funding sources and making recommendations to improve the implementation of the Access to Counsel and Evictions program. Chapter 746 also established the Access to Counsel and Eviction Special Fund, later denoted in the analysis the fund, which is administered by the Maryland Legal Services Corporation. The Maryland Legal Services Corporation is a nonprofit corporation that provides civil legal aid services to low-income Marylanders. Exhibit 15 here shows the existing funding structure for the Maryland Legal Services Corporation. Their traditional funding sources are the interest on lawyer trust accounts, often called IOLTA, also the filing fee surcharge, and the distribution from the Abandoned Property Fund. The interest in lawyer trust accounts, IOLTA, and the filing fee surcharge have been fairly severely impacted due to the impacts of COVID-19 with the near zero interest rates, as well as low cases filed before the courts. The Abandoned Property Fund distribution was increased in fiscal 2020 to $8 million, and that will continue forward as well. They also, Maryland Legal Services received a one-time fund transfer by the administration for some Deutsche Bank settlement funds, which were received by the Attorney General's office and later transferred to Maryland Legal Services. They also received funds from the Relief Act, and they also, in prior years, they've carried over funds as well. I'd like to note that these funds cover their existing programs. They do not so far fund the Access to Counsel and Evictions program. Moving forward to Exhibit 16, which shows the Access to Counsel and Evictions funding. As you can see here, Maryland Legal Services Corporation estimates that it needs $11.8 million to implement the program in fiscal 2023. The Department of Housing and Community Development budget includes $5.4 million in funds here in the red bar. However, there is a remaining need for $6.4 million in funds in fiscal 2023. That amount increases to $21 million in fiscal 2024, and the full implementation of the program is estimated at $30 million in fiscal 2025. Exhibit 17 shows the uses for the funding for the Access to Counsel and Evictions program. The funding for legal services would comprise the overwhelming majority of the program spending at 93%, with education and outreach at 6% and administrative expenses at 1%. DLS is recommending adopting a committee narrative requesting that MLSC submit quarterly reports on the status of the Access to Counsel and Evictions program. Also, DLS recommends adding $6.4 million in general funds to the judiciary appropriation for the Maryland Legal Services Corporation to fully fund the Access to Counsel and Evictions program in fiscal 2023. Moving to the second issue, which is the judiciary data availability and reliability concerns regarding the Racial Equity Impacts Notes program. The Schaefer Center for Public Policy at the University of Baltimore released a report that provides some recommendations, particularly that when entry is entered into the Maryland electronic court system, demographic data on the defendants' race and ethnicity should be included. DLS was asked that the judiciary should comment on steps that are being taken to verify and track the demographic data for defendants in the courts necessary for the implementation of the Racial Equity Impact Notes program. The third issue here is the 2021 Court Performance Measures Report. This report is an annual report submitted by the judiciary that provides the number of the categories of cases that are terminated within the standard for the standards were suspended due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. However, it is important that this data is available as it gauges the ability of Marylanders to access the courts within a reasonable time limit. Due to that, DLS recommends the adoption of budget bill language restricting $500,000 in general funds pending the submission of the fiscal 2022 annual court performance measures report. Next, we have the recommended actions section. I've talked about a few of them before, but I'm going to go through them in order. The first is to reduce the funds to bring the funding for the Judicial Compensation Commission recommendations in line with the Commission's recommendations. That would decrease the funds by $12.5 million. The next is an annual piece of narrative requesting a report on the appointed attorney program costs and utilization. The one after that, item 3, is another piece of annual committee narrative requesting judgeship needs for fiscal 2024. The one after that is an annual piece of budget bill language that restricts $8,250,000 pending for the implementation of DeWolf v. Richmond. Sorry. The next item 5 is to restrict the $500,000 pending the submission of the Judiciary Court Performance Measures Report in fiscal 2022. Item number 6 is to increase by $6.4 million in general funds, the appropriation for Maryland Legal Services Corporation for the purpose of funding the Access to Counsel and Evictions program. Item number 7 is the one for the Access to Counsel and Evictions quarterly reports from the Maryland Legal Services Corporation. Sorry for the scrolling. Item number 8 is the providing for the elimination of excess funds for the circuit court clerk salary increases. That's $619,000. Item number 9 makes the remaining funding for the circuit court salary increases contingent on the enactment of Senate Bill 74, House Bill 519 of the current legislative session. And the final one, item number 10, is an annual piece of narrative requesting a status report on the major IT developments within the judiciary. One more thing before I end my presentation, there's an update. The Maryland Electronic Court, or MDEC, has gone live in Montgomery County. This leaves only 2 remaining jurisdictions for the implementation of MDEC, which is Prince George's County and finally Baltimore City as well. That ends my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weiss. Do we have any questions for the analysts? All right, seeing none. Thank you again, Mr. Weiss, for your thorough presentation. We will now go to the agency, and let's start with Chief Judge Getty.
Thank
I think you went mute. You're on mute. There you go.
We are good
Oh,
now.
okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the subcommittee. My name is Joe Getty. I am Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals, and our panel from the Maryland Judiciary today includes Chief Judge Morrissey of the District Court of Maryland and our State Court Administrator, Pamela Harris. With your permission, Mr. Chair, I'll begin with the recommended actions. I believe you have before you our written report, and I will just work through the written report. As you heard in a very thorough presentation by Mr. Weiss, there are 10 recommended actions, and the Maryland Judiciary concurs with all 10 actions. We have a little bit of commentary. Recommendation 1 concerns the Judicial Compensation Commission. And when our budget was submitted in December, the Judicial Compensation Commission had not made its recommendation yet. So we put in a placeholder based on a recommendation from 4 years prior, the prior Judicial Compensation Commission. So we concur with the $12,502,000 reduction as found in recommendation number 1. Recommendation number 2, we also concur. It has an October 1st reporting date for the appointed attorney program costs and utilization. Recommendation number 3, we also concur. This is our current practice to provide a letter on judgeship needs by December of every year. The last 2 years, our letters have included no requests for new judges because of the COVID pandemic and the nature of the courts, as you just saw in Mr. Wise's graphs with regard to decline in cases. Recommendation number 4 concerns restrictive language for attorneys at initial appearances. We concur with that language. Recommendation number 5 is a $500,000 restriction on expenditures until our court performance materials are presented to the General Assembly and Department of Legislative Services. Our comment on that is that with MDEC, we receive information pretty quickly to be able to put together a court performance measure. Right now, because of COVID, we're waiting for the National Center of State Courts to provide us with some revisions to our court performance standards. And what we present to the General Assembly now is typically year-old data. Because once we compile the data, we send it out to the circuit courts for verification. If the reporting date was extended a little bit, right now it's November the 1st, it was pushed back 6 weeks to 2 months, we believe we could give the prior fiscal year data to the General Assembly, and we'd like to be able to move to that cycle. The example is, last fall we would have given fiscal year 19 data instead of fiscal year 20. Next fall, we'd like to be able to give you the fiscal year 22 data, but we need a short extension to get that data to you. I don't know what your time frame is for DLS to review that information in time for the General Assembly session, but our suggestion on that recommendation would be to give us a little more time so we can give you more current data. Recommendation number 6. We concur with the restriction for access to counsel and evictions. Recommendation number 7, as Mr. Weiss indicated, this is the responsibility of the Maryland Legal Services Corporation. It's my understanding they're present here today to testify next on the access to counsel program and the quarterly reporting schedule. So we defer to MLSC on those items. Recommendations 8 and 9 concern the circuit court salary increases pursuant to House Bill 519. 8 is a reduction in funds. That reduction in funds in our budget, we calculated a 12-month increase for circuit court salaries. However, the salaries go into effect for the next term, which would be after the November election, a December enactment date. So this reduction in funding of $619,000 is due to the delayed implementation of those salary increases. And we concur, as do we concur on recommendation 9, which all this is contingent on the General Assembly passing House Bill 519 regarding circuit clerk salaries. And recommendation number 10 is the reporting requirement for the information technology development, which we also concur on the report and the reporting date. That covers the recommended actions. If the committee has any questions on recommended actions.
Thank you very much. Do I have any questions from any of the committee members? I see none, Chief Judge.
If not, we'll move on to the budget issues. The first budget issue is, as Mr. Weiss indicated, the Maryland Legal Services Corporation. There were 2 sub-issues in that one issue. Again, we will defer to MLSC to their testimony that we believe will follow our testimony. The second issue is the judiciary data availability regarding the General Assembly's ability to do racial equity impact notes. This is based on a Schaefer Center for Public Policy report that was put together. I can say that the judiciary has given extensive thought to how we can modify our MDEC system to provide access to the General Assembly to racial equity information. However, the information that comes to us is not a census of demographic information, and it may be difficult for us to fully meet your expectations with regard to this information. And I'll ask State Court Administrator Pam Harris to offer a few more comments with regard to that.
Are there any questions? Okay, fine. I'm really going to discuss a little bit in more detail the recommendation 5 as well as issue 3. They go together, sir. Good afternoon. My name is Pam Harris. I'm the State Court Administrator. First of all, I'd like to thank Caleb Weiss as well. He's been a wonderful budget analyst and understands the issues in the judiciary. DLS is recommending bill language to restrict $500,000 in general funds pending the submission of our FY22 annual performance court report. So I'd like to give a little bit of an explanation as we concur with this, but we are, as Judge Getty indicated, we are seeking an additional 30 days to provide that information. During the past 2 years throughout the COVID emergency, the district courts and the circuit courts remained open under restricted operations, but to provide the essential functions necessary to address the emergency and urgent matters. Due to the limitations on case types and the volume of matters capable of being addressed during the emergency, coupled with the protecting of the public health during the pandemic, Maryland, like other states, suspended case time standards in the trial courts during that health emergency. It would not be prudent for us to give you information based upon the past 3 years of filings. As you have seen, which Mr. Weiss showed you, the filings dropped exponentially, and the report would have no meaning to the time standards nor to the judicial needs analysis that we also use that report for. So with the case processing time suspended, there were no standards from which to measure trial court performance for the fiscal years 20 and 21. However, we knew the importance of this tool, not only for our information, but for the trial courts. Therefore, we engaged the National Center for State Courts to update the judicial officer workload assessment and the time standards to ensure that we have a current, comprehensive tool to forecast future needs and to see how the courts are performing. As requested, the judiciary will indeed move forward with the analysis of the fiscal 22 data at year end. But in doing so, we respectfully request that the legislature provide for an extension, just 30 days, an extension from December 1st to January 1st, and to render January 1st moving forward as the future date for the submission of this report. This will ensure up-to-date information being provided to you and for us to use as a measurement tool for the trial courts. If there are no questions on these issues, I would turn to Chief Judge Morrissey to address the two comments DLS requested the judiciary to address today in this hearing.
Thanks. Before you move on, the trial courts, you said are fully back open to the public now, or in person now?
We will be fully open in person March 7th.
March 7th. Got it. Thank you. Any other questions before I move on? Before you move on? Seeing none? All right.
Good afternoon, Chair Bridges and members of the subcommittee. For the record, my name is John Morrissey, and I'm the Chief Judge of the District Court of Maryland. I'd also like to ditto what Ms. Harris said and thank Caleb Weiss for his detailed and thorough analysis that he's presented to this subcommittee here today. As part of that DLS report, he asked the judiciary to comment on the extent to which COVID-19 is the cause of the decline across the district court for the case types that you saw in the earlier slides, and what if there are other factors are influencing this decline. And specifically, he asked that the judiciary address the decline in landlord-tenant cases and whether an increase in these cases was expected in fiscal 23. The written testimony that we submitted to this subcommittee goes into greater detail, but the pandemic is by far the major contributing factor to the decline in not surprisingly, in all case types, unfortunately, except for domestic violence, which has increased over the time period. With respect to failure to pay rent case filings, the judiciary believes that the pandemic, federal legislative enactments, if you remember back in July of 2020, the CARES Act took effect. And then later in the fall, the CDC agency, the CDC issued certain orders restricting evictions. Governor Hogan had also made a certain order affecting evictions. And all of these things kind of have combined. On a positive note, it appears that the distribution of federal rental relief monies is one of the most significant factors in keeping that decline down right now, because it's getting out to the people. It was somewhat of a slow start, but it really picked up speed over the summer, and it's wide open right now and really resulting in a decrease in filings because the landlords and the tenants are resolving that before they need to come to court. The judiciary believes that failure to pay rent case filings will slowly increase in fiscal 23, although I kind of have a big asterisk next to that. It's dependent on the continuation of rental relief monies. And I know aside from the federal monies, there's a bill pending that would fund that type of relief. Pending legislation increasing the amount of filing fees, the start of the access to counsel and evictions program by MLSC that you've already heard about, and I'm sure that they will talk about when it's their turn. And then it's dependent on, hopefully there'll not be another surge of COVID-19. I'm keeping my fingers crossed. Mr. Chair, I then have comment too also that it regards the pretrial home detention program. And if you'd like me to go into that, I'd be happy to. Okay, so Mr. Weiss, our DLS report suggested that the judiciary should comment on the implementation of the pretrial home detention program, including the outreach efforts in collaboration with executive agencies to ensure that available funds are utilized to the greatest extent possible. So the judiciary's response is that the implementation of this program has been somewhat difficult for both the judiciary and the private home detention monitoring agencies. An agency is kind of a misnomer. These are private businesses. They're companies. They're not agencies of the government in any manner. There are only 3 licensed private home detention monitoring companies in the state. and only 2 so far have submitted invoices and are participating in this program. To pay the invoices, the companies are required to provide documentation that they had never previously maintained. This is more challenging for those that were already on home detention when the program first started, because the companies had to go back and obtain this information. Once this documentation is received, we have a business process where the clerks out in the field then verify the information, and they're looking for things like the hookup date and the termination date against the court records to ensure that what these companies are telling us is in fact correct. And then it comes to the finance offices here at AOC and my headquarters for payment. So far, multiple meetings and training sessions have been conducted during the development and are ongoing during the implementation of this program. Right now, it's requiring almost daily interaction with the courts and these 2 private companies through calls, meetings, and emails. Don't get me wrong, the 2 participating companies have been very cooperative, and they want to get paid, and I understand. But they continue to struggle to provide such things as a DUNS number, which is required in order to accept payment of federal funds. And we continue to work with them. We checked today, one of the 2 had not yet gotten it in. We're encouraging them to do that, and whatever support we can, we'll give it to them, because I think we want to get them paid as much as they want to get paid. Just one final point: to obtain private home detention, the defendant must request the court to grant such a pretrial option. Typically, the public defender or private counsel will make this request on behalf of the defendant, and then they'll facilitate the placement with these private companies that are providing the services. The issue that's outlined in the report is not really whether there's an outreach to other governmental entities, because these are private companies. Instead, the issue remains that the judiciary, we continue to work with these companies to work through the payment process and ensure that it's seamless, and we'll get there. The judiciary has no regulatory authority in closing, and nor should it. I'm now talking about not the payment part of it, but the oversight of these companies. The Department of Public Safety is the licensing authority, but there is no really regulatory body checking on them to make sure they're doing what they're doing. Such a regulation is important to ensuring that these companies are not just getting paid, but in fact are providing proper monitoring of the individuals that are out on home detention. We were hopeful that the work group that was enacted as part of House Bill 316 would look at these and other issues, but the judiciary was not included as part of that work group, and it's not known whether the work group has been formed or made any recommendations. In closing, this program imposes obligations on the judiciary, and we had complained at the beginning of this. We were kind of unceremoniously had this program put upon us, that these go way outside of the adjudicatory functions that's the primary role of the judiciary, and we believe that the executive branch would be much better suited to oversee this program. I thank you and members of this subcommittee for your time today, and I would turn it back over to Chief Judge Getty or any questions that you may have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. I do see a question from Delegate Acevera.
We can't hear you, sir.
Yes,
No?
I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. I'll be very brief. First is more so of a follow-up question for whosoever from the Maryland Judiciary can respond. But I know that expungement is a continued concern for a number of folks. Every year, we pretty much increase the judiciary's budget to include technology, et cetera. And I'm very concerned about whether folks' records are being expunged so that this isn't a barrier to re-entering and contributing to society. I know there have been a number of bills, I think House Bill 1336 and something more recent. I'm not sure what happened to it, but with the money that the judiciary is asking for every year, can someone provide me an update on expungements, partial expungements, where we are with that as far as case search? And I know we give quite well, I mean, it's built into the budget around technology and whatnot, these very same systems. Are these systems that you all have now, are they able to do these kind of expungements?
I'll ask Chief Judge Morrissey to respond since he has the district court perspective on that.
Thank you, Delegate Acevedo. Those are very good questions, and I know we've spoke a little bit about this before, and I'd be happy to update you on where we are. There were two of the bills that you were referring to. One was passed 2 sessions ago, was vetoed by the governor and overridden, and that involved the blocking from case search of any charge of a marijuana case prior to 2014, I believe. And the second bill was passed by you all this last legislation, overridden again, but went into effect this year. And that's that it would block from case search any positive outcome, which would be a nolle prosequi, a dismissal. It did not include not guilty, but we assume that you all meant not guilty because that would make sense in a judgment of acquittal. Both of those programs have been implemented in case search. Unfortunately, it does have some unexpected consequences because there are clinics that were doing expungement hosted by some of the legal services providers throughout the state that had written programs against case search that would identify individuals that may have eligible cases. It's not our program, it's their program. I'm not 100% sure how it works, but from all accounts, it was a pretty good program that was helping a lot of people. When we blocked those individuals that had those positive outcomes, that's a good thing, right? It eliminated or at least reduced the ability of these providers to, then find that through their autonomous program. It's still available at the courthouse through our public terminals. However, it requires more legwork, obviously. So I don't have a solution for that, unfortunately, Delegate Acevedo. With respect to partial expungement, which I know has been a big issue before the legislature, that still continues to be. It's really not a technology issue. It's more of an issue of how we had maintained our files historically over the last 50 years or so, whether they're ever made it into an electronic case management system. I'm talking about the real old files now, prior to the 80s. They're not in any type of system at all. They're over at the archives in all likelihood, although some are still maintained at each individual circuit court. It's kind of a mishmash. So that still continues to be a challenge. There'll always be needed a manual intervention because a lot of the data that you would need to look at, and I'll give you an example. Some of the bills currently pending want to partially expunge cases that involve marijuana with an amount that would now be permissible use, right? So but prior to 2014 and even after that, the charges were never filed with the amount that was obtained in the stop or the frisk or the warrant. It's a charge of possession of CDS marijuana. And that the actual amount of the grams is located somewhere in the written narrative in a statement of probable cause. And that's in a PDF. And it's a difficult process. We're trying to get there. It's always going to require a significant amount of manual, regardless of the best technology that we have out here. And we're trying to find that technology and vetting it every chance we can get. But it's still going to be a challenge for us.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. Just one quick second bite.
A quick question. And
thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. And thank you for the response. I would appreciate if we could follow up offline, just out of respect to the committee, so we could get so that I could get a better sense. Because I know we're pressed for time. But my other question, just really quickly, and it's I guess for Chief Judge, because I know salaries and the compensation of judiciary staff, that's something that we discussed in this committee and the Appropriations Committee quite a bit. And I know that there's been some legislation to allow for judiciary employees, if they so choose, to join a union and negotiate wages, et cetera, and whatnot. I know that that's legislation, but it is my understanding that the chief judge or whosoever, I'm sorry, but whosoever has the power through an administrative decision to be able to do this, to sort of save us the trouble of I guess, going through the legislative process and whatnot. And so can anyone, or perhaps the chief judge, confirm that, just so that I'm clear?
So I can partially respond, I think, in that I've been chief judge since September, and I've not had any briefings or any updates with regard to pending legislation on unionization, but I can ask staff for that briefing and get back to you.
I appreciate that. And just so that I'm clear, the chief judge is, apart from legislation, is someone who has the authority to authorize that if employees so choose, that they would have, the freedom to associate or to join a union and to negotiate on wages and working conditions. Am I correct in that understanding?
So I'm not even sure that I can answer that question. The chief judge under the Constitution is basically the chief executive officer of the judiciary, but I would have to look at what has been researched and discussed and presented in the past and get back to you.
Understandable. I'd appreciate a follow-up. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yep. Delegate Proctor, Vice Chair Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure who to address this question to, so I'll just put it out there. I'm looking at Exhibit 6, bail reform, and I know that there was a great deal of work done to keep people with limited resources who have not committed serious crimes, maybe misdemeanors even, out of jail. And I'm looking at how the percentage has increased in 2021, and I wonder if there's any explanation as to how that's happening at this point.
I can address that sort of from the policy view, Vice Chair Proctor. There has not been a bail reform legislation passed by the General Assembly. Instead, the Court of Appeals adopted a bail reform measure about 4 years ago through our Rules Committee. And our approach to bail reform was not to eliminate cash bail, but to put an emphasis on the judges in our courts to not hold people in jail for a cash bail that they did not have the resources to meet. So judges are to individually look at the capacity of an individual to make a cash bail and make a determination upon release or being held without regard to the cash bail. At the time we did that, and it was a 5-hour hearing before the Rules Committee, it was very clear to us that these numbers would change, and they would change in the manner in which they are shown on Exhibit 6, which means that if a judge in a trial court is looking at whether to release or whether to be held without bail, and they don't have the intermediate ground of cash bail, in other words, the decision is one or the other, we anticipated that judges would hold more without bail because it's one of two options, and they have to measure danger to society. So I would say Exhibit 6 presents an outcome that we anticipated when we adopted bail reform in 2017.
In Delegate Proctor, if I could add one other thing. If you look at the results from 20 and 21, they're somewhat skewed by what's been happening as the result of the pandemic. If you look at the 3 years before that, the number of unsecured releases had been going up each year. And that's from prior to the rule change. We were averaging in the low 50s, right around 50% of release prior to bail review. That would be at the commissioner level. And it jumped significantly after the rule went in effect. And it had continued to go up as judges got used to the new system and provided a combination of either release on recognizance or an unsecured personal bond that doesn't require any monetary ability to pay. When the pandemic hit, it really, if you remember, it's March of 2020, right? We were in lockdown in April. The numbers for criminal filings went down off a cliff, basically. It went down dramatically because no one was out and no arrests were being made. Those that were being arrested for much more serious events than what had occurred previously. There's also been a trend over time to encourage the legislature, in I believe it was 2013, made a whole list of crimes that were that previously had been by arrest, could have been by, say, citation that year. And then the next year they made that certain crimes that had been arrest or could be citations had to be citations. And that resulted in a significant decrease in arrests over individuals. And that's what this data tracks. So what you're not seeing are the statistics that say how many people are in jail on any given day, and that's dramatically down year over year since 2017.
Well, that's great to hear. And I'm sure you're keeping statistics on which judges are looking at what particular type of cases and everything else involved with that. So it'll be interesting to look at the data when it's available. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Delegate Proctor. Any other questions from the members? We do have Ms. Deb Seltzer from the Maryland Legal Services Corporation, who's also here to present, as well as some members of the public to give public testimony. So Chief Judge, if you don't mind, I'd like to turn it over to Deb, unless you have any further comments.
No, we thank the committee for its consideration, and we will stay for the remaining of the presentation.
Thank you very much, Chief Judge Getty, Morrissey, and Ms. Pam Harris for your presentation and your response to the analysts and our questions. Thanks for sticking around as well. And for now, we'll turn it over to Ms. Deb Seltzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the subcommittee. My name is Deb Seltzer. I'm the Executive Director of Maryland Legal Services Corporation. MLSC is a legislatively created nonprofit. The legislature created us in 1982 to be the statewide funder of civil legal aid. And last year, the General Assembly named us as the administrator of the Access to Counsel in Evictions program. I too also want to thank Mr. Weiss for a thorough review and dive into this very important topic. There were 3 points that we were asked to respond to. So I hope you have my written testimony, but I will just go through them briefly. The first was an explanation of how we are using the Relief Act funding that was received last year. We have deployed more than $2 million of that Relief Act funding currently to fund current eviction prevention grants in fiscal year 22. Some of that money remains for fiscal year 23, and there is a more thorough explanation in my written testimony, but basically we are holding on to that funding to make sure that we can cover any gaps that may result from the implementation of the Access to Counsel program. The Access to Counsel program does cover very specific case types and eligibility. It will also be phased in over time. We will not be able to cover the entire state all at once, but we want to ensure that if there are jurisdictions or case types currently receiving services, that those services can continue uninterrupted. So the Relief Act funds will be deployed next year to make sure that we're filling any gaps. As Mr. Weiss noted, we recently learned that we will be receiving $5.4 million from DHCD in emergency rental assistance funds to jumpstart the Access to Counsel program. We enthusiastically concur with the recommendation that another 6.4 be appropriated. There was, as noted, a Access to Counsel and Evictions Task Force. The task force recommended as the main funding source for this program an ongoing appropriation to make sure that the program had a stable funding source year after year. We are not quite sure yet of all of the uses of the 5.4 million. But we've begun work with DHCD and look forward to continue to work with them on that. But another 6.4 million to get to our total of 11.8 for the first year of implementation would really be a key factor to the program's success. I'll also note that the 11.8 million and then the subsequent projections for out years are based on a number of factors, including the number of eviction filings, the number of tenants who end up being eligible and choose to participate in the Access to Counsel program. So as Chief Judge Morrissey noted, the number of failure to pay rent filings has continued to stay low. We hope that it does not get back to the original level so that the Access to Counsel program can reach more folks. But we will be adjusting those assumptions as time goes on to make sure that, you know, if there are not as many cases, we can reduce the projected costs. So we'll be constantly monitoring all of those assumptions to make sure they're still valid. And then the final recommendation was for MLSC to submit quarterly reports on the Access to Counsel and Evictions program. We are happy to do so. Two notes. One, we are already required to send a yearly report to the General Assembly by August 31st of each year. That would cover much of the items requested here. If acceptable, we would request that annual report kind of cover or count as the Q4 report to this committee so that we have enough time to wrap up the end of the fiscal year and are not doing that reporting twice. The other point in the reporting section was about the number of or how the attorneys are paid. We anticipate much of this work will be done by staff attorneys at our nonprofit grantees. So I just wanted to call to your attention that their staffing structure will be different at all of these providers. We do not make grants generally on a cost per case basis because we recognize that all the grantees are different in their geographic area, in their service model, in the level of service they provide. So we will certainly provide budgetary information, but just wanted to call to your attention that we'll be providing averages for the most part, as opposed to a cost per case. And so thank you for the opportunity, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Seltzer, for being here as well. Do we have any questions for Ms. Seltzer? All right, seeing none from the committee, thank you again for being here. We do have three people from the public to give public testimony. Let's start with Mr. Christopher Dews. And as yesterday, Mr. Dews, you have 1 minute.
Indeed. Thank you so much for the time. My name is Christopher Dews. I'm the Senior Policy Advocate of the Job Opportunities Task Force. Our mission is always just to help lower wage workers advance to higher wage jobs. We just would request that as part of the budget, in the budget items for the Maryland Judiciary, that the pretrial payment program that Judge Morrissey spoke of that has been established continues to maintain funding and is allowed to be extended. I know this is probably more of a legislative thing, but it's allowed to be extended from 2022 to 2025. It has helped over 400 Baltimoreans per month alone and is actually saving $300,000. It's an effective program, it's efficient. And I know that for Judge Morrissey, it is a bit of a headache, but it has been a tremendous godsend to the community. And so we just wanted that to be on the record.
Great, thank you very much, Mr. Dews. Thanks for being here. Next, we'll hear from Nicole Hanson-Mundell. Thought I saw her on here.
She is in the room, Mr. Chair. And we have asked her to unmute.
All right, we'll instead go to Todd Oppenheim. And if Nicole is on and able to unmute, we'll get her after Todd.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. The Maryland Office of the Public Defender asks that the subcommittee continue funding for pretrial home detention fees for indigent defendants in the courts. It's a system. We don't really see it as a program. It's a system that's been very successful as administered by the Judiciary. We're merely seeking to continue the General Assembly's successful efforts from last year in passing legislation regards to pretrial home detention inequity. Because of the new law last year, money became available in October to go towards pretrial home detention fees for poor defendants. From my perspective as an attorney of 18 years, this has been one of the most impactful actions for our clients to help them pre-trial. I've seen injustices firsthand, someone who's paid nearly $6,000 over the span of a year plus pre-trial process, then to have the funding bill take effect only with a couple weeks left before their trial date, which by the way, their case was dismissed and the client continued to have a conviction-free record. That won't happen anymore if we continue the funding the way it is. So home detention is difficult to get. We have to argue to judges for our clients to be put on them. There's all sorts of restrictions that come with it. You don't automatically get to work or go to funerals or anything that you normally would. You just get to be at home, which can be a big deal, especially during a pandemic when it saved lives. This funding is kind of a first step towards fixing the pretrial process across the state, because free home detention is not available in every jurisdiction. This funding made it so. So we think the program system, as we see it, was very successful as done by the Judiciary, which is a statewide organization where others aren't necessarily everywhere in the state. And it was very, very huge for our clients. We'd ask that the funding continue in terms of racial equity and fairness to indigent defendants.
Thank you very much, Mr. Oppenheim. Good to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you, Chair.
You too. Thank you all for being here and for your participation today. I'm going to try Ms. Nicole Munson-Handel one more time before we move on. So Nicole, if you can unmute yourself. And if not, all right, I think that will end the budget hearing for Judiciary. Thank you all very much for being here. We appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We will now move on to the Comptroller of Maryland, and we'll begin with the analysis by Ms. Morgan Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Bear with me while I share my screen. Okay, can you see that? Okay.
Yes.
On page 1, you'll see the operating budget summary for the Comptroller's Office. And in fiscal 2023, the Comptroller's budget decreases by $14.8 million or 8.5% to $158.9 million. And you'll note that in fiscal 2021, the actual reflects $218 million in federal stimulus funds that were not provided in other fiscal years. Now we're going to move into the managing for results discussion, and this is going to be the bulk of the analysis. This starts on page 4. And on Exhibit 1, you'll see that it's highlighting the personal income tax returns received and processed between fiscal 2017 and fiscal 2021. The Comptroller aims to process electronic returns within 4 days of receipt and paper returns within 22 days. And you'll notice that between fiscal 2020 and 2021, there was an increase of 40,000 electronic returns, but the percent reviewed timely declined from 93% to 87% in that same time frame. And this is directly related to the pandemic, as resources were not available due to COVID-19 related absences, among other factors. On page 5, you'll see Exhibit 2, which talks about delinquent dollars collected on unpaid taxes between fiscal 2017 and fiscal 2021. And these taxes are both income taxes and business taxes that are delinquent. And you'll note that in fiscal 2021, the Comptroller collected $262.6 million in unpaid income taxes and $172.8 million in delinquent business taxes. This is a substantial decline from the year prior, when they collected $401.2 million and $225.1 million in unpaid income and business taxes, respectively. The difference is due to a suspension in the tax collection activities during the pandemic, which were implemented in 2020 following one of the governor's executive orders. On page 6, you'll see Exhibit 3, and pardon my scrolling. This is the unclaimed property reported and repaid exhibit. And this is again fiscal 2017 through 2021. The comptroller is responsible for holding and attempting to reunite lost or unclaimed property with its rightful owner, and unclaimed property reported to the comptroller in fiscal 2021 increased from 186.6 million in 2020 to 246.7 million in 2021. And you'll note that from fiscal 2020 to 2021, the amount of unclaimed property paid to the rightful owner is increasing modestly by 4.9 million. And that is a decrease from 2019. But again, with the pandemic starting in 2020, they're starting to increase the amount of unclaimed property that they can reunite. I just want to note that on page 7, we do have a discussion on the federal stimulus funds provided in fiscal 2021, most notably the 177.8 million in federal funds from the Coronavirus Relief Fund, and that supported direct stimulus payments to qualifying Marylanders. And then you have 32 million allocated through the Relief Act, among other amounts, but I won't read them all. In fiscal 2022, there's a proposed deficiency of $150,000 in general funds, which are going to be used to support accounting training provided by the comptroller. And then you're going to see Exhibit 4 on page 8. This is the overview of agency spending. The vast majority of the fiscal 23 allowance is dedicated to personnel at 60%. And the other biggest chunk is contractual services at 31%. The contractual services includes items that are related to the Annapolis data center and other IT contracts. Specifically, the IT things are relating to the 2 major IT development projects that the comptroller has. I'm going to talk a little bit about the proposed budget changes, but I really want to touch on these major IT project changes. You'll note that the initial cost for the new payroll system in fiscal 2023 is $2 million. And then there are 4 items that are relating to the integrated tax system that is an ongoing IT project that I'll discuss a little bit later. And those are the final 4 in the IT project changes. Personnel on page 11 talks about vacancies, contractual full-time equivalents, and the abolishing of 7 positions. So the comptroller's office had 147 vacant positions at the end of calendar 2021. And that's about 13.5% of all total positions. And these are within the compliance, revenue, and IT divisions. And I have the amounts listed, 44, 37, and 17 positions respectively. The comptroller's office added 15 contractual full-time equivalents between the fiscal 22 working appropriation and the fiscal 23 allowance. And those are in the revenue division. The comptroller needs to have staff, especially with the extension of tax season. And because temporary positions are limited to working 6 months, these contractual FTEs will provide flexibility in this length of employment with the extension of tax season. The fiscal 23 allowance abolished 7 positions. This is actually a net change of 8 positions, 6 full-time and 2 part-time. And these abolished positions were spread out among compliance, revenue, the Annapolis data center, and the IT services. And most of those were for administrative roles, clerks, and specialists. There's only one issue to discuss today, and it's about the new major IT project. And this is on page 12. So this is to modernize the Central Payroll Bureau's payroll and financial management systems. The payroll system currently is a legacy mainframe system, which poses problems as it ages, including insufficient security systems and inadequate staff that have proper training to maintain it as it continues to age. The Central Payroll Bureau would like to modernize to a cloud-based service for payroll processing, and this would help them meet standardized industry best practices. They would also replace the FMIS, which is the accounting system for record of estate. This system is roughly 20 28 years old. So you can imagine that there are some outdated pieces within this system. The fiscal 23 budget books only show $11 million for this project. And of that money, $7 million is in fiscal 23. So DLS expects that is not the full cost of the project, especially since this project involves multiple agencies, namely DBM, the comptroller, the treasurer, and MDOT. So DLS is asking the comptroller to discuss the anticipated timeframe for completing these system replacements. And our only recommendation, aside from concurring with the budget, is to recommend adopting committee narrative requesting a report on this project, as well as the continued reports on the ITS major IT project. And that's noted here on the recommended actions page. And then I just want to note that there are 2 appendices, one that has JCR reports from last year, and then the audit, and then additional appendices that go through the IT project and the central payroll project that you can read at your leisure. I won't go through all of them, but it has details. And with that, I am done with my presentation, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Smith. Do we have any questions for the analysts? Seeing none, thank you once again for your thorough presentation. Definitely appreciate it. And now we will turn to the comptroller, Mr. Peter Franchot. Thank you for your patience, sir, and thank you for being here today.
Not a problem. And frankly, it was very instructive to listen to the judges, because 35 years ago, I was a freshman delegate assigned to the Appropriations Committee and to this subcommittee. And we had the legendary Tim Maloney from Prince George's County as chair of the subcommittee. But there was another individual I remember like it was yesterday, Delegate Paul Muldowney from Western Maryland. And you guys are so lucky that Paul is not on the subcommittee, because we'd be here until 8 or 9 o'clock at night berating the judiciary. He, for some reason, had a tremendous animus against the Maryland judiciary. And he used this perch on your subcommittee to just grill them. So I enjoyed, from a distance, seeing a much calmer and more civilized presentation and reception by you, but it brought back a lot of memories. And Chairman Bridges and Vice Chair Proctor, thank you, and all the members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to present the fiscal year 2023 budget request for the Office of Comptroller of Maryland. I would like to note that this is the last time I will address this committee as Comptroller of Maryland. In some way, shape, or form, as a member of the Appropriations Committee for 20 years and now as Comptroller entering my 16th year, I have interacted with this committee. I'm grateful for the partnership and the collaborative work, and for your support of the Office of Comptroller, which will, for many decades, continue after I'm long gone. Without your support, it would not be possible for this agency to have accomplished so much and deliver results for so many of the people of Maryland. With your permission, Mr. Chairman, and in the interest of the committee's time, I would like to abbreviate my oral testimony, and my written testimony has been submitted for the record. I have with me Deputy Comptroller Andy Schaffel, who replaced the beloved Sharon Bernardi, who's now heading up a major tax organization in Washington. And Deputy Comptroller Schaffel has Dennis Krzyzak, our budget expert. If we need to, we'll get other members of the leadership team to answer specific questions. But I'd like to begin by acknowledging the exceptional work of the outstanding staff, especially during the incredibly strenuous challenges presented by COVID-19 pandemic. And let me just say in passing that your analyst, Morgan Smith, and I'm not saying this casually, is very attuned to what has gone on. And I don't think we can just kind of come before you and announce everything's okay. Everything's not okay. And, it's because of the virus. And I just want to commend her for her rational, mature approach to our very, very important agency. Like most agencies and employers, the Comptroller's Office experienced a plethora of challenges relating to the pandemic. Nonetheless, the 1,100 dedicated men and women who comprise one of the most effective and efficient tax agencies in the country, not one of, the most efficient and effective tax administration agency in the country. They all rose to the challenge, remained committed to providing taxpayers with respectful, responsive, and results-oriented customer service. We are seen as a customer service juggernaut. Last year, the passage of the Relief Act by you and the delayed start of the 2020 tax filing season added another set of hurdles for the agency, because we were entering the tax season just as you all were voting on the Relief Act. When the Relief Act did become law on February 15, 2021, I pledged to get stimulus funds quickly into the hands of more than 422,000 eligible Marylanders. These are all in my tax base. 4 days later, after that pledge, and one of the days was a snow day, so nobody showed up. So really 3 days. On February 19th, thanks to the hard work and planning of this agency, 98% of payments were processed and out to people who were struggling through no fault of their own with the economic consequences of the pandemic. Specifically, that means 246,751 electronic payments with a value of 105.1 million transmitted to banks for deposit into individual accounts, 186,878 paper checks totaling 77.3 million were processed by the comptroller's office within 3 days. That's upon you passing it and the governor signing it on Monday. Friday, the money was in their bank accounts or in the mail. Additionally, as directed in the Relief Act in the Comptroller's Office, we processed more than 40,000 checks to Marylanders caught in the unfortunate unemployment insurance backlog. And we did that within 48 hours of receiving the payee list from the Department of Labor. So for your constituents out there who complain about government competence, direct them over to us, because we're a shining example of how, frankly, government, legislature, and agencies should work together. It was a tremendous effort by our staff who diligently prepared for weeks, because it was right in the middle of the opening of the tax season. So we were processing literally hundreds of thousands of tax returns simultaneously. So these Relief Act funds were quickly distributed to people who needed it most. In addition to that important task, we did not miss a beat accepting state tax returns, getting refunds out the door within, on average, we may be up to 4 business days, but we like to aspire to 2.5 business days. As you may recall, late in 2020, the Comptroller's General Accounting Division played, this is an additional issue, a vital role in assisting nearly 4,000 childcare providers left waiting for over a month. The grant dollars were granted to them, but these are small businesses generally operated by women and minorities. They had no reserves to call on. They're small, for-profit businesses. Anyway, these grant dollars had been promised but not delivered. And these providers understandably said, hey, we're delivering care for children of essential workers, vital businesses, et cetera. So our experts assisted the Maryland State Department of Education with their role in the process. And once the payment request came to us out of education to the General Accounting Division, we processed direct deposits and checks within hours, not days, to help keep these child care centers in business at a critical time. In January, utilizing authority granted to me, I extended the 2022 Maryland income tax filing and payment deadline to July 15th, 2022, as your analyst noted. This is the 3rd consecutive year, and we are the only state in the union that's done this. I'm stunned that my colleagues my peers in other states have not done this. Anyway, this is the 3rd consecutive year which my agency has extended the tax filing and payment deadline in order to help tens of thousands of fellow Marylanders who continue to feel the financial impact. But more importantly, it's the small businesses, because most of them are affected by this because they receive their pay in income from their small businesses. The exclusions have allowed taxpayers who are struggling and small businesses to use that money towards immediate issues like paying rent or keeping their business open. Previous extended due dates, these are over the last 2 years, approximately 600,000 taxpayers each year have have not applied for this. They simply took advantage of it. And it was well over $1 billion in a no interest, no penalty loan to these folks that desperately needed it. Most of the taxpayers did not need it. So they sent us the taxes, and particularly ones that need refunds, they're not holding off. So we're seeing all of them come. But this budget right now reflects our shared desire to find even more ways to further build upon our success as an agency in the most fiscally prudent way. Over the last 3 fiscal years, we've placed a strong emphasis on strengthening our taxpayer services operation. We've established an independent standalone taxpayer services division, which has better synchronized our efforts to address taxpayer needs across our agency. I'm especially proud of, and that thanks to our investment in our call center operations, the average wait time, and we aspire, is 1 minute, but we're going to need some help from the subcommittee. If you're willing to listen to the deputy comptroller in a minute, we need some help on that. We need some flexibility. We need some TLC in order to accomplish what our aspirational goal is. Despite the pandemic, we still assisted 22,335 taxpayers in our branch offices across the state, of which 423 were virtual appointments designed to assist taxpayers that did not want to visit our offices in person. In addition, our 12 regional branch offices prepared and filed 1,589 Maryland state tax returns free of charge for our taxpayers.
Sir, you're muted.
You're on mute.
You went mute, sir.
Okay, sorry about that. Guess someone didn't like my testimony there. Anyway, in today's, did you get any of that? Or I won't repeat it, but in today's digital age, my office continues to emphasize the convenience of our free, secure electronic filing system. I will say for the vice chair's benefit that we have 2 of our 12 satellite offices happen to be in Prince George's County, Upper Marlboro and Greenbelt. I'm proud that more than 2.8 million Marylanders utilize the digital service, the tax year 2020. That represents 88% of all income tax returns, which is another historic high. When I became comptroller, we were talking about 30% filing electronically. Now it's 88%. In addition, 95% of Marylanders who filed their returns electronically last year had their returns processed and refunds issued within 4 days. We aspire to 2.5 business days, and as I proudly noted to this committee and to taxpayers across the state, that over 90% of Maryland taxpayers have their returns processed within 3 business days. What's more, the average number of days for electronic filers receiving their refunds was 2.5 business days. In calendar year 2021, our agency processed more than approximately 3.3 million tax returns, processed more than $3.1 billion in tax refunds, much of that in the first 6 weeks of the season. As the state's chief fiscal officer, my agency continues to work diligently to ensure that all citizens, businesses, and companies are paying their fair share of taxes. By consistently implementing new, innovative, and aggressive strategies, our compliance division has collected $8.2 billion in delinquent taxes over the last 14 years. These were identifiable delinquent taxes that, but for their effort and our strategies, would not have been collected. I stress that these are not new taxes, rather they're taxes lawfully owed to the state. In the Comptroller's Office, tax fairness is not an abstract concept, it's a driving principle. Another crucial service that complements excellent customer service is working relentlessly to protect taxpayers' hard-earned money from financial criminals. Since I took office in 2007, we've intercepted and blocked more than 140,000 fraudulent returns, prevented the disbursement of more than $260 million in fraudulent refunds. And that is a big difference between us and different other agencies, because we've strategized and worked on this. Well, for the entire 16 years I've been with the agency. And a significant component of our fraud protection involves identifying and halting fraudulent tax preparers. Unfortunately, there are several hundred of them in the state. The Comptroller's Office prides itself on maintaining a state-of-the-art fraud detection model that can identify suspicious returns regardless of how sophisticated the criminals become. Since 2016, my agency has blocked 236 tax preparers businesses at 250 locations around the state. We don't have the authority to shut them down, but we refuse to process the tax returns of their clients. After the General Assembly's overwhelmingly bipartisan and unanimous passage of the Taxpayer Protection Act of 2017, the Field Enforcement Division has used every tool at their disposal to not only quickly investigate fraudulent actors, but also block them from victimizing other innocent Maryland taxpayers and robbing the state's treasury. I'm extremely proud of the critical work that my Field Enforcement Bureau, the Questionable Returns Division team, and all our employees who play a role in safeguarding Marylanders' financial security and combating the national epidemic of tax fraud and identity theft. The Field Enforcement Bureau was renamed from the Field Enforcement Division, which previously handled all of the above matters, as well as alcohol and tobacco regulatory affairs. I'm happy to report that our mission to maximize both customer service and taxpayer protection, we're making tremendous progress. We're on schedule, on budget with our transition into Compass, our new state-of-the-art processing system that replaces our 25-year-old smart system that is costly, inefficient, and obsolete. The only plus there with our old system is it's very hard to hack because it's so old. Compass is already and will continue to improve our internal systems and processes that will strengthen our core agency operations and bolster our ability to deliver exceptional taxpayer service. This major and critically important overhaul of our tax system would not be possible without the consistent support of you all in the General Assembly, Governor O'Malley, Governor Hogan, Treasurers Kopp, Davis, and the Board of Public Works. Transitioning to our new integrated tax system is a very important achievement to me and to my leadership team because this money belongs to you and the taxpayers of Maryland. It's crucial that we value their tax filing experience and what their money does for this state and its economy. I'm sincerely grateful to Deputy Comptroller Andrew Schaffel, who's leading our agency's effort to ensure a smooth and seamless transition to our new tax processing system. As the agency that will be charged with ensuring proper taxation and compliance of cannabis sales, the Office of the Comptroller stands ready and is committed to working with the General Assembly to create a strong, sound, and fair taxation and regulatory framework. It's our sincere hope that the General Assembly will give careful consideration to the feedback and suggestions provided by a team of experts assembled within the Comptroller's office, as the creation of a cannabis tax will impact ongoing and future agency operations, particularly for the Compass project and for the state's revenues, because some states have done it right and some states have dropped the ball. So I encourage everybody to have your elbows up. Given that various legislative proposals for cannabis legalization all anticipate a start date ranging from fall 2023 to spring 2024 for retail sales, it's imperative the legislature begin appropriating funding to ramp up the taxation and compliance apparatus in this fiscal year to allow for the necessary staffing and programming upgrades to occur on time. With gratitude, I respectfully ask for your support of our Comptroller's fiscal year 2023 budget request in order to continue the successful work we've undertaken together on behalf of Maryland's taxpayers. And turn it back to you, Mr. Chairman, and your members, and obviously Mr. Schaffel and Mr. Krzyjak are here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Comptroller. Definitely appreciate you being here as well, and for your thorough response. I know we've got two members that already have their hands raised for questions. So I'll begin with Delegate Acevera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate that.
From Montgomery County.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Good to see you, Mr. Comptroller. Let me just take a moment to thank you for, just your years of service. I know this is your last PSA meeting, the last time you got to come and defend your budget and deal with us. And just want to say we really appreciate, the work that you've done over the years. And I want to shout out your former deputy, Sharon Bernardi, I believe, who is no longer with your office. But she's done a phenomenal job over the years, as I'm sure you will agree, and really appreciate just the teamwork that you've both done. I don't have any questions for you, but really appreciate that and appreciate the work of your team, and good luck to the person who's assuming that role and filling Sharon's stilettos.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate McKay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Comptroller, thank you for a wonderful, both you and I will not be here in this setting next year, but look forward to having other settings that we will be in. The Zoom brings back the days when I was a county commissioner and we would do those video talks. You know, been very, been a big fan, sir. So thank you very much. You told that story about former delegate Paul Mondani, and I recently saw him, and he's anyhow, he's always got a great story and a great smile. So thank you for bringing back some good memories there, sir.
Thank you, Delegate.
Thank you, Delegate. Vice Chair Proctor.
You're muted.
You're on mute.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Comptroller. You've been done a service to all of us in Maryland, and you've been a special friend to us, my family, and I want to thank you for that. I do have a sidebar question. There is an opportunity to get a tax break if you contribute to one of the 4 HBCUs. But if you take that option, it says you cannot file electronically. I'm just curious as to why.
Well, that's news to me. I'm a huge fan of our 4 public HBCUs, as you know, including Bowie. So I believe this is a software issue, and we're with you on fixing that, and we will promptly get back to you with something that I think is good. Andy Schaffel, do you want to add in anything there?
I would say the same thing, that usually it's almost the opposite, where you need to file electronically to get certain credits. We'll follow up with you. It's certainly, I'm glad you elevated that. We'll make sure that's not an issue.
Yeah, Madam Vice Chair, I think it's a private sector side that's doing that, not us, but we'll get to the bottom of it and get back and fix it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Any more questions, comments, or kudos?
That's okay. You don't have to save the
I haven't got
kudos.
my comptroller coin, so.
Oh, yeah.
I think we all do.
I don't know if it doesn't arrive in the mail in the next 2 weeks, Mr. Chair, we might have to consider restricting funds.
Yeah.
Look, Mr. Comptroller, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for all the hard work of you and your entire staff, and you know, for all the years that you've been comptroller, and even before then, working on behalf of the citizens of Maryland. You are definitely appreciated, and although this is my first and last budget hearing with you, I do wish you luck in everything that you do, and you never know, could be working with you again in some capacity, in some other way.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and those are kind words, and appreciate it, and good luck to you also, because this is a wonderful subcommittee that you've got.
Thank you very much. Definitely appreciate it, and appreciate you as well.
Thank you.
All right, I think that will end the budget hearing for the Comptroller of Maryland. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just saying thank you. On my way out.
No problem. Thank you. That'll end the budget hearing for the Comptroller, and now we'll move to Alcohol and Tobacco Commission. And once again, Ms. Smith, if you can give us the announcements.
Sure. Okay, can you see that? Okay, great.
Yes.
Here on page 1, you'll see the operating budget summary for the Alcohol and Tobacco Commission for fiscal 2023, and you'll note that their budget increases by 1.5 million or 38.2% to 5.3 million in fiscal 2023. And you'll note that the ATC is comprised entirely of general funds, and that's a little bit different than what we've seen for some other agencies. In fiscal 2022, let's talk about the deficiency first. The fiscal 22 deficiency totals about $124,000. And the vast majority of this is for contractual services. The ATC is using this for the destruction of alcohol and tobacco that they have confiscated from various sources, among other things. You'll note that this proposed efficiency talks a lot about law enforcement, and that's going to be a theme throughout the entire analysis. In Exhibit 1, you'll see the overview of agency spending for the fiscal 2023 allowance, and you'll see the vast majority of this spending is for personnel at 81%. And the personnel, I'll talk about this later, but it's used for 38 regular positions and 1 contractual FTE positions. The remaining slices of this pie chart, I would note that the motor vehicles and the supplies and equipment are the biggest chunks. And motor vehicles is increasing primarily due to getting new vehicles for law enforcement officers, which I will talk about briefly in a second. On page 3, you'll see the proposed budget change for the Alcohol and Tobacco Commission. And as I said before, pardon my scrolling, you'll see that the agency grows by $531,000 for new personnel costs for these 8 positions. You'll also note that in the next line, it talks about an increase in employee and law enforcement pensions, primarily due to the new law enforcement positions, and that increases by $276,000. And then within the other changes, you'll see other things that are associated with these law enforcement positions. The replacement of radios for law enforcement, new desktop printers, and other things that are going to help them as they get established. And then the most important piece, I think, here is the purchase cost for 9 vehicles, which are partially offset by one-time costs associated with title transfers from the Comptroller's office to ATC for several vehicles. And that is an increase of $261,000. On page 4, there's a discussion about personnel. And as I said before, there was an increase of 8 positions between the fiscal 22 working appropriation and the fiscal 23 allowance. Of these positions, 7 of them were sworn law enforcement agents, and 1 position is a non-sworn administrator. The law enforcement agents will be assigned to the Field Operations Bureau of the Field Enforcement Division, whereas the administrator position is just going to be under the Regulatory and Administrative Services Bureau, so apart from the law enforcement. A change in the analysis for this year is finally adding some discussion about MFR data. And so you'll see here on page 5, a quick discussion about the amount of retail inspections that are being done by the ATC. As you know, the ATC was created in 2019, and then finally in 2021, they were authorized to begin enforcing alcohol and tobacco laws once the field enforcement was transferred from the Comptroller to the ATC. And the ATC has a goal of deterring the possession and sales of illegal tobacco and alcohol products, and they do that through inspections of retail establishments. In 2021, ATC inspected 58% of all tobacco retail establishments and 27% of all alcohol retail establishments, which is significantly higher than their goal of 15% and 9%, respectively. So that's really good to see. And I just want to note in here between 2019 and 2020 is right around the time that they became established as their own agency. So the 27 and 2018 numbers are when this was under the Comptroller's office. And as far as recommended actions, DLS recommends concurring with the governor's allowance. And with that, I conclude my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Smith. Do we have any questions for the analysts? All right, seeing none, thank you once again. We'll now turn this over to the Alcohol and Tobacco Commission. And I know, Mr. Silverstein, Chairman, you have a number of individuals with you as well. If you want to introduce those individuals, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Bridges, and Vice Chair Proctor. My name is Deb Seltzer. I am the chair for the Alcohol and Tobacco Commission, and I've had the privilege of working with the Executive Director, Jeff Kelly. We also have some other people with us, William George Director of Field Enforcement Division, is here also. And Thomas Akris, who has joined us and is doing law work for us.
Chairman, Mr. Chair, you may have to get a little closer. I think your microphone is just going in and out on us.
Okay, let me try something. Can you hear me better now?
I heard you better the other way.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Oh.
Is that any better?
That's fine.
All right, so we want to talk about just a couple of things. The Alcohol and Tobacco Commission is charged with conducting various studies, issuing reports, and evaluating some alcohol product labeling. Its approach has been to foster understanding of the alcohol and tobacco industries and their effect on public health, the economy, and the greater community. This understanding is strengthened by being inclusive in our discussions with regulators, Department of Health, health advocates, industry associates, and members of the interested public. And the governor's allowance and Ms. Smith's analysis and recommendation would further the work of the ATC to become the impactful educational, regulatory, and enforcement agency it could be. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Kelly.
I think you were turning it over to Mr. Kelly.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Chair Bridges and Vice Chair Proctor, members of the Public Safety Administration Committee. My name is Jeff Kelly, and I'm the Executive Director of Maryland's Alcohol and Tobacco Commission. I'll be referring to it as ATC moving forward. I've submitted written testimony, and I'll keep my remarks very brief. And as Chairman mentioned, with us today is Bill George, the Director of the Field Enforcement Division, and Tom Akris, the Director of the Legal and Legislative Division. There are the two divisions that are comprised within the Alcohol and Tobacco Commission. And if time permits, they might want to introduce themselves at the conclusion, just so you'll know who they are and how to contact us if we can do anything for you. First thing is I'd like to just thank you for the opportunity to address you and any concerns you might have with our FY23 budget allowance for the ATC. And second, I'm really echoing the comments of the comptroller regarding Ms. Smith. She was very thorough. She was transparent. She left me feeling like I was a partner in the process. This was my first time doing a budget like this at all. And she was very kind and gentle and walked me through it. Very inquisitive, but I really appreciate her help and assistance in getting through this. The ATC was created in 2019 as a session of the Maryland General Assembly to become effective July 2020. Enter COVID-19. General Assembly understood the difficulties with standing up a new agency, and by way of Senate Bill 911 in 2020, delayed the start until January 1st of 2021, mid-fiscal year, and it was just last January, a year ago. That meant that the FY22 budget had already been appropriated, and understandably, the ATC had no input to participate or participation in that budget process. But we get to participate this year, and I'm grateful for that. In creating the ATC, only 27 positions were transferred from the Office of the Comptroller to the ATC. So the net result in our enforcement program, we went from 18 field agents to 8, reduction of 10 field agents. They have to cover the entire state. It's 5,500 tobacco retailers. It's 9,100 alcohol retailers, give or take a few. And the square mileage of the state, we're a fairly large state if you consider there's only 8 people to cover it. And it's simply just not enough. A quick example, within the next couple of nights, on the same night, we're going to be conducting 2 significant operations in 2 jurisdictions that will require all of our field agents. It's not a problem, except I won't have one more agent available to help anybody else with any calls for service or assistance. When you consider our geography, and we're kind of long, it means I'm bringing these agents in from as far as Garrett County, Worcester County, north and south of the state, and everywhere in between, because we're bringing everybody in. Long term, that is not sustainable. Good news is the allowance will provide us to get 7 new equipped agents and a new administrator. And a new administrator will be helping us work on the mandates of the ATC, as mentioned by Chairman Silverstein. And we want you to know we're a new agency. We don't have a history yet, although we have something of a history of our previous years when we were within the comptroller's office. We're dedicated to regulating alcohol and the tobacco industries fairly. And we want to educate other regulators, the public who's interested, and the General Assembly, and in the manner that the General Assembly envisioned when it started us. We're working to get there. We've tried to make our transition seamless to anybody from outside, even if we've had a little bit of moving and shaking it internally. We're trying to make it as smooth as we can on the outside. So I just say on behalf of the ATC, I wholeheartedly concur with the Department of Legislative Services analysis and recommendation. and seek the support of this committee in making that happen. And thank you. I'm happy to take any questions. And as I mentioned, Bill and Tom are both here as well. And we'll do whatever we can do to answer questions or move this forward for us. And thank you.
Great, thank you. Definitely appreciate you being here for your first public safety budget hearing, and my first for you as well as the chair of the subcommittee. So I appreciate it.
Thank you.
We're gonna grow together. How about that?
I'm ready. Yes, sir. Thank you. I love that. That's music to my ears.
A question about growth, though. I know you mentioned the number of staff that you have. What would you consider the optimal number of staff that you might need?
You know, I'll tell you. I mean, I'm thrilled with this the allowance for the show. I have to tell you, I truly am. When we were with the comptroller, we had 27 sworn positions, and I think that's probably why the General Assembly, in deciding how many pins to move, picked 27. They probably looked at the sworn positions we had, but in reality, 27 sworn positions will be great, but I need civilian staff. I need the people who license, who do some of the regulatory work. And we also had a handful of about 6 civilian inspectors who were just fantastic. And pound for pound, they're a great investment. We don't have those now. So I think we're really on the way. I think this year I'm going to be able to find out a lot. I mean, because we are still growing and we've got just a couple of vacancies to fill now. And then I'm looking forward to filling a handful of them in July. And we'll know a lot more by next budget submission, I hope. But where we were at 27 allowed us to do a whole lot of things. But at the same time, we have responsibility for the slot machines on the Eastern Shore, all the businesses in the state that have business licenses, of which there's 90,000 of them, give or take, 5,000 or so. We had the investigations for tax fraud and ID theft that I used to do for the comptroller as well. So we had 27 people to do all that. We don't have the same amount of responsibilities, but we can really hone in on what we do have now. I think and do a better job.
Got it. Are some of those responsibilities or pins, or a combination of both, still within the purview of the comptroller's office?
Yes, sir. Because earlier iterations of the bill that was to move our entire division, and there were some competing interests, quite honestly, that elected. And I'll just say most specifically, the motor fuel industry really thought that they were better served by staying within the office of the comptroller. And the motor fuel industry is regulated by some sworn agents and some civilian staff as well. And we just had to divide that up. So we just necessarily had to divide the existing division up so day one, both groups could be served with staff.
Got it. Yeah. Are there any questions from any of the other members? Seeing none. I thank you so very much for being here. Definitely appreciate you and the opportunity to continue to grow with you, as I said. But before we get out of here, I see the Delegate Severo can't let us go without at least having one question.
No question. Just to let Mr. Kelly know that we're usually easy the first time around. So buckle in next year. We're gonna have some serious questions. Just kidding, but welcome. Good luck.
Thank you very much, Delegate. That's fair too. Next year we're going to have a record. So I know the judgment will be a little bit more difficult, understandably so.
It's the honeymoon season.
That's right. All right. Well, thank you very much. Definitely appreciate you being here. That will end the hearing for Alcohol and Tobacco Commission.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Definitely appreciate it. Thank you for being here. That will actually end our hearings for today. I just want to thank the members and especially the public testimony that we had today. I know we were trying to get Nicole on and she was having a little trouble with unmuting. And so, Nicole, I definitely apologize. And I hope that we have some written testimony from you that we can use as well. So with that, thank you all once again and enjoy your afternoon.